Is this the very first SUV? It's a 1959 Willys Utility Wagon. Introduced right after the war in 1956, Willys was one of the first to offer an all-steel 4-passenger station wagon. In 1949, they added 4-wheel drive, and this might just be the prototype SUV that we still enjoy today. It's got all the right ingredients, 6-cylinder engine up front, driving all 4 wheels, enough room for passengers and cargo, and a tall wagon shape that remains timeless today. This one has a very high quality restoration and spent about 25 years in a West Coast museum, and then has been extensively refurbished in just the past few months. If there's a better one, I don't know where you'll find it, and it drives extremely well thanks to some very minor but very well chosen modifications. So let's go for a drive. The Willys was still no frills in 1959, and of course this was still primarily a work vehicle. There weren't people buying these to drive around in the suburbs. Station wagons were still big sellers, and the virtues of 4-wheel drive on pavement and in inclement weather had not quite been made apparent to the average consumer. But the park service, logging industry, all kinds of areas of the economy where people needed to go places there were no roads, and the Willys Utility Wagon was absolutely a home run. This one just runs and drives beautifully. It starts right up, starting quickly and easily. The controls are basic. Speedometer is the primary gauge with temperature and fuel gauges built in, and a couple of idiot lights for the other stuff. Choke, wipers, headlights. This one has a really cool accessory flashlight with a Willys logo on it that's actually a nice thing to have, kind of period correct. But otherwise it's no frills. Everything inside has been freshly upholstered and refinished, repainted, and everything works. Wiper, heater, lights, turn signals, horn, everything works. Let's take a ride in this neat little truck. Nice clutch take up. This one has had its axles changed out for a set of later Jeep CJ5 axles, which have slightly more user-friendly gears in them. I think they're 373s now instead of the original 488s. And while it takes a little bit of the snap off the line, it gives it 60-mile-an-hour cruising ability, and I think that's a fair trade-off. Takes a little bit more clutch action to get it rolling, and you need to hang on to second gear a little bit longer than you think. But once it's rolling, it's real pleasant to drive. Thanks to the recent and very high quality restoration, it feels tight. There are very few squeaks and rattles, which quite frankly is shocking. Even the tailgate is secure. There's nothing bouncing around under the dash, so somebody was sweating the details on this one. These were 4-passenger vehicles. There's a set of removable seats for rear seat passengers. Passenger seat does tilt forward. And that's sort of why I think of it as the first SUV. It's not just a panel van. It was built with passengers in mind first and foremost. Well, you can hear the tailgate rattling just a little bit. Driving along the worst roads in town. This car has also been upgraded with a set of front disc brakes, which are probably not a bad idea. I don't know that they're mandatory, but if you like that extra little margin of comfort, it's certainly not a bad choice. And with the CJ5 axles, the upgrade was easy. Mechanical, very crude. That was the point though. This wasn't a sophisticated vehicle. The only wagon that was cheaper in 1959 was the Crosley. So they weren't all about making it polished, but the hardware feels incredibly rugged. The 3-speed shifter, it snaps through the gears. I haven't felt a shifter like this since I put a Hurst in my 5-liter Mustang. I mean, it just clicks right into gear. Next to it is the shifter for the high and low range in the transfer case, and the third shifter over there engages the front axle, which also has manually locking hubs. So it has all the hardware you need for fairly serious off-road work. This truck's wearing a set of custom-built 16-inch steel wheels. They were made especially for this truck just to move the center line out a little bit, give them a little bit more offset, to give it a little bit more of a broad stance. Most folks won't even notice the difference, and with the modern radials on there, it's got kind of a all-purpose, all-terrain look that I find appealing, and it's a little less delicate looking than it would have been originally. Although, make no mistake, this is a really tough little vehicle. Rigid axles fore and aft, leaf springs, big ladder frame. So it was built to work hard and play in the rough. So it's kind of nice to drive something knowing you're just not going to be able to break it. It is not fragile in the least. This one's equipped with accessory turn signals. They are not self-canceling, so you have to pay attention and realize that you're using them. Unfortunately, the clicker's kind of loud, so you can hear it. But with those slightly taller axle gears, it doesn't quite dig out of corners the way it would have with the stock gears in it. Again, I think that's a fair trade-off. And around town, momentum is your friend. Keeping it rolling, keeping up your speed. Smoothness matters, so it's a rare vehicle that brushes up your driving skills at the same time you're enjoying it. The speedometer's a little bit of a pessimist. It's about 7 miles an hour slow, so it's showing about 40. We're actually doing about 47, 48 according to my GPS. And it's pretty easy. The tough little 226 cubic inch Super Hurricane inline-6 engine was standard equipment in the 4-wheel drive utility wagons. Makes about I don't know, 100 or 110 horsepower, not a lot. But it makes the most of what it's got. Rolling along here, it's pretty happy, and I've had this up to about 60 or 65, and it really doesn't complain at all. Making it a really good choice for today's world, because I think its days of playing in the dirt are probably over. The hardware's still there, and if you need it, low range will give you all the torque multiplication you need, making horsepower almost completely irrelevant. It'll still climb a wall if you put it in low range. But between the reasonable gears and the distinct lack of squeaks and rattles, it's really a pleasant vehicle to drive. It makes nice mechanical sounds. I can hear a nice 6-cylinder grumble from the exhaust out back. There's a pleasant mechanical whir coming up the shifter from the transmission. Not that anything's wrong, it's just the layers of rubber insulation that most cars would have are just not present in a Willys. It was basic, and it was built to last. It's got a nice little surge of acceleration when you need it. And it's certainly happy enough around town. Keep your momentum up, and it digs out reasonably well. The utility wagon was designed right after the war, again, much like the Dodge Power Wagon, to fill a demand from soldiers returning who realized suddenly that the tools they had in the military could be useful at home as well. And so Willys, who already had a lot of experience building 4-wheel drive Jeep vehicles, decided to build a large larger, more comfortable, more spacious wagon. They hired Brooke Stevens, the noted industrial designer who designed this vehicle in the 40s. And since the Willys Corporation didn't have much money for expensive tooling and deep draw dies to make fancy sheet metal, they actually tried to keep everything as flat and simple as possible. And many of the panels on these vehicles were actually stamped by the same companies that were stamping out refrigerators and ovens for your kitchen. They could work big flat sheets of metal, but they couldn't do complex shapes and deep angles. So Brooke Stevens made it look interesting without costing a fortune in terms of tooling. And I think that's rather clever. And I think that's what led to the trademark Jeep upright, boxy look. Even today, Jeeps are shaped like boxes on wheels. And I'm driving around today, I've driven past a number of people driving their modern Jeeps, and they're waving and flashing their lights and honking their horns because they recognize this as a descendant, an ancestor of their own vehicles. That's pretty cool. The Jeep fraternity is very friendly and very tight-knit. And seeing this is still a special occasion. The cheerful red and white color combination looks awesome. And as it goes down the road, people recognize it as something kind of out of the ordinary. Of course, by 1959, they were using 12 volts, so you have strong headlights, good starting. It's happy to run on the cheapest possible gas you can find. The parts are virtually laying around at Napa, so everything you need for tune-ups is always available, making these very affordable to own and maintain, because that's the idea. They were built to be simple, rugged, maintain it in the field, and you don't have to be some kind of master mechanic to keep it in top health. I'll admit the ride and handling are a little bit crude, and we're bouncing along here on one of the roughest roads in town. It's certainly not bad, but I can feel through the steering wheel that there's a live axle, a lot of weight bouncing around up front there. It's got a good alignment, but like a lot of kingpin suspension cars, it tends to follow the crown of the road. So you might see that I'm aiming it a little bit to the left. It's not because the alignment is bad, but just because it's just rolling off the crown of the road a little bit. But effortless keeping up with traffic here. These disc brakes are nice and strong. It's got good stopping power, firm pedal. No worries there. I'm going to go to second. And we'll run it out a little bit here. It pulls real nicely. I think we'll eventually be able to push it up to about 60 here. About 55, 57, there's 60. And it's pretty happy. Does not feel like it's working too hard. I don't feel like I'm over revving it. So for an old vehicle designed for rough terrain to work this well, that's kind of a pleasant surprise. Plenty of stopping power. It's confident, it's smooth, no problems. As I mentioned, the first 4x4 Willys Utility Wagon was built in 1949. This is a 59, and technically this was built by Kaiser Corporation, which bought Willys in 1954, creating what would be the beginnings of the American Motors Corporation, AMC. And the Jeep brand has sort of survived a lot of handoffs without really losing its soul. I think the folks driving a late model Jeep could probably climb behind the wheel of this one and they would feel very much at home. The DNA is still very much evident in the vehicles they're building now. I think that's awesome. I mean, what other brand has that kind of continuity throughout its entire life? To be able to just call on all of the things that have made it great for the past 70 or 80 years. I think that's neat. The view over the hood with a sort of flat hood with the fenders on either side, very familiar to Jeep folks. I also like this beautiful white steering wheel, which is kind of a relic of the 40s when it was designed. It's stylish. The big diameter certainly helps with the unassisted steering. But it's got these nice little finger holds here that I found myself using kind of unintentionally. I didn't even realize that I was holding the wheel the way it was designed to be held. Yeah, I totally get this. I understand why this is fun. On smooth pavement, it really is nice. The modern radials probably help quite a bit. They've got lots of sidewall, so it takes the edge off of rough pavement. It does have modern tube shocks under it, and pretty much everything's new under the skin. The engine's rebuilt, transmission's rebuilt, clutch is new. The wiring is all new. There's a fresh radiator up front. The gauge says it's running a little hot. I think the gauge is more of a suggestion than an accurate reading, because my handheld infrared thermometer says it runs at about 180. It's about 75 degrees today, so I think it'll have no problem keeping cool no matter what you're doing. 12 volts means you can plug in your GPS and your cell phone. It's cooperative with all that hardware. As you can see, the Jeep guys are very excited when they see this thing. Yeah, I can see having some fun with this. Throw the family in back, go out and have an adventure. So we're starting to see a nice uptick in values as people look for things that are not the same old, same old. And this certainly stands out. You're not going to see many of these at a show outside of a Jeep Jamboree. And it's just a real friendly, approachable little vehicle. I know Melanie has fallen in love with it, and she's making noises like we should keep it. And it's certainly of the right quality to add it to our own collection, but I don't know, you can't fall in love and keep them all. But this is very much a lovable little truck. I'm gonna pull in and park it. Thanks for riding along with us. We'll see you next time.